One of the biggest questions I have about the DCU going forward is who's going to be the new member of the Justice Gang? In Peacemaker Season 2, we learned that the Justice Gang, funded by Maxwell Lord, were looking for a brand new member to join the team. However, by the end of the season, we did not get an answer as to who that new member would be. And in this video, I want to talk about 5 characters who I think would be perfect new additions to the Justice Gang. Now, I know there's a lot of you out there that think the Justice Gang could be disbanded maybe as soon as Man of Tomorrow, and even though I certainly think that's a possibility, in order to make way for something like the Justice League International, or the Terrifics, I'm going to be operating on the idea that the Justice Gang will be continuing past Man of Tomorrow, because even though I definitely think some of the characters I'm going to talk about could be in Man of Tomorrow, it's very possible we do not get a new member until some other project. However, now let's get into the list, and to kick off the list, I want to start with a character that would probably be my top choice, or at worst second choice, and that is Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle, who we know is set to appear in the DCU at some point, as currently there is an animated series in development. And the reason Blue Beetle would personally be so exciting to me is because I absolutely love the version of Blue Beetle that we got from the Blue Beetle movie in 2023, and I think Xolo Maridueña is absolutely A+ casting for the role, and he definitely deserves a chance to get to reprise that role in live action. Of course, we know the Justice Gang is heavily inspired by the Justice League International comic run, which did feature Blue Beetle as a prominent member. Now, I know in the original comic run it was Ted Kord and not Jaime, but in the spirit of the Justice League International comic, I think it'd be cool to feature a Blue Beetle. I also think writing and story-wise, he'd be a really fun, youthful energy to add to the team that also possesses immense power that could help the team a lot. I simply would love to see how Mr. Terrific and him, or how Hawkgirl and him would interact, and again, most importantly, I just love this version of the character that we got from the Blue Beetle movie, which I get was in the DCEU, but importing that character into the DCU would be even easier than something like Peacemaker, as the Blue Beetle movie really had no major connection to the larger DCEU, unlike Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad, which yes, are still kind of off on their own, but there are heavy ties into the actual DCEU, so if they did it for that, I think Blue Beetle is definitely a character worth doing it for, because I really do think they hit it out of the park with the casting, and I really just thought it was a heartfelt movie that I would absolutely love to see grandfathered into the DCU. One character that is already heavily rumored to be in Man of Tomorrow, and some people even believe has already been cast, is Martian Manhunter, and he would be another great choice for the Justice Gang. He, of course, is another character that featured prominently in the Justice League International comic run, and is long overdue for a real opportunity in live action. Yes, I know he played a role in the DCEU, and we finally got to see him in his true form in the Snyder Cut, but that's not nearly enough for a character like Martian Manhunter, who is not only one of the coolest characters in DC Comics, but also in many ways the heart and soul of the Justice League, and he's a character that I desperately need to see in the DCU. I will admit, even though I do think Martian Manhunter would absolutely be perfect for the Justice Gang, I do just kind of want him in the Justice League, and I know it's certainly very likely that the Justice Gang and the Justice League will most likely be merged together at some point, or even if they do not fully combine and we get something like the Justice League International, or maybe even still the Justice Gang independent of Maxwell Lord, I do think somebody like Martian Manhunter would definitely make the leap to the Justice League, but I would love for him to be at the center of, say, the first Justice League movie, instead of being just the new member of the Justice Gang in something like Man of Tomorrow. And that's why, if I were to rank the options, I do think Blue Beetle is overall a bit better of a fit, especially if it were going to be in something like Man of Tomorrow, because we already have a great intro to that character that could already seamlessly fit in the DCU, and you really wouldn't have to explain a whole lot about the character. Yes, I understand not enough people saw the Blue Beetle movie, so you probably still have to do a little exposition on the character and explain his place in the world, but I'm totally fine with that with a character like Blue Beetle, because again, if you want to learn more about him, we already have a whole movie that I just think fits perfectly in the DCU, whereas if you're going to introduce Martian Manhunter just as a random character joining the Justice Gang, that would feel like a disservice, especially for a character that we've been waiting so long to see in live action. And I know there's a good amount of you out there who either have read the comics or saw the Justice League show that know plenty about Martian Manhunter, but for the general audience, it's going to be a new character, and when we introduce Martian Manhunter to something like the DCU, I really want him to get plenty of time in the sunlight and plenty of time as a main focus in the story, and I think something like a Justice League movie would better allow for that. Or, I mean, I would totally still love a Martian Manhunter solo project as well, but I'm not really too optimistic we're getting that anytime soon. So even though I think Martian Manhunter is the character that I absolutely want to see the most in the DCU right now that is not currently confirmed, I do think even though he would be a great fit for the Justice Gang, I would kind of like him saved for a bigger role in potentially a future project, and maybe the new member doesn't show up in the Justice Gang for Man of Tomorrow. Maybe there is a separate thing like a Salvation movie or just a Justice Gang project that would allow for Martian Manhunter to get more time, and if that's the case, then I'm totally cool with it. But obviously at some point, just get him on the Justice League, because whenever we get the Justice League, if Martian Manhunter character is not on that team, I am going to be so damn disappointed. Another character that we know is set to appear in the DCU at some point soon is Booster Gold, and I do think including him as a member of the Justice Gang could make a lot of sense. First off, it would be a great introduction to a character that I feel most general audience members would know very little about, and including him in something like Man of Tomorrow or some other project that features the Justice Gang would be a great way to drum up more interest for his own show, which is currently in development, and if I had to guess will probably come out in 2028 at the absolute earliest. However, if he's already getting a dedicated show, I kind of just assume that'll be his first appearance in the DCU, as it'll most likely detail his origin and set the character up in the broader DCU to maybe someday then cross over into something like the Justice Gang or the Justice League, and typically I am usually in favor of doing that. I'd much rather you establish a character first before throwing them into a big ensemble movie or show, as you just have a bit more of a better connection and you don't have to spend as much time in a movie explaining who this character is. And especially for a character like Booster Gold, I do think there would be a little bit of explanation required, especially for those not familiar with the character. But when it comes to overall fit, I do think Booster Gold is absolutely perfect for the Justice Gang. He fits the overall vibe. I would love to see how he interacts with the characters of the Justice Gang, and I do think Booster Gold as a character, even though he is phenomenal as a solo character, I think he's always at his best when he's operating in an ensemble, and I do think the Justice Gang would be absolutely perfect for him. I would just personally be a little shocked if he became a member of the Justice Gang before we got his own television series. Now maybe he shows up as like an end credit in Man of Tomorrow and we see him for like half a second, and then we get a further explanation of the character in his own series, but I do think Booster Gold would be absolutely perfect, even though I do think it's going to take a little bit of time before we see Booster Gold in any prominent role outside of his own series. Now if that series gets canceled, well then all bets are off, of course. One of the more underrated upcoming DCU projects that I know I'm immensely excited for is the Mr. Miracle series, which is going to be an animated series based on Tom King's run of Mr. Miracle, which is a really great read if you have not yet read it, and I cannot wait to see how that's going to establish things like the new gods, Mr. Miracle and Barda, in the DCU. But I would also love to see Big Barda and Mr. Miracle specifically make the jump from animation to live action and potentially be new members of the Justice Gang in the future. In my opinion, Mr. Miracle and Barda have truly one of the best relationships in DC Comics, and I think as a duo they would add a very unique dynamic to the Justice Gang. Right now, if we're being honest, the Justice Gang doesn't really feel all that much like a team. Instead, it just feels like a bunch of superpowered mercenaries forced to work together just so they can get paid by Maxwell Lord. However, if you added a couple like Miracle and Barda, I do think that could provide a bit more of an emotional core to the team and hopefully would bring the rest of the team closer together. Also, I just think Miracle is such a unique character and Barda is an absolute badass, and including them on the team would just make the Justice Gang as a team overall a bit better. Also, I am going to just do anything in my power to keep asking for new gods characters to appear in live action, because for so long I've wanted to see the new gods and specifically a new gods movie in live action. So if we could get Miracle and Barda on the Justice Gang, it makes that dream a little bit more likely, even though I still am not going to get my hopes up. Now this last character is one that I absolutely think is in James Gunn's wheelhouse, and honestly, if you would have described the Justice Gang to me long before I knew any of the members, I probably would have guessed that this character would have been a prominent member, especially knowing that James Gunn was writing and directing the movie, and that is Plastic Man. Now I know for some of you, including somebody like Plastic Man, may be a little bit terrifying as it could lean a bit too much into the comedy and silliness of the team, as well as the fact that the stretch powers are clearly something that are quite hard to pull off in live action. But when done correctly, I do really think there are some great redeeming qualities about Plastic Man, and his story of redemption, if given the proper time in a movie or show, could be really great to see. Also, with the inclusion of Plastic Man, you could basically set up a possible terrific spin-off, considering you already have most of the team in the Justice Gang, and I do think that's a very logical thing to happen if the Justice Gang were to fall apart, and I think the Terrifics would be a really fun project to see. Whether that would be in the form of a movie or a show, I think either could work, and honestly, I'm just kind of a fan of Plastic Man. I will admit, I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, but when they don't go too far into the comedy and he's a part of an ensemble piece, I do think he could be a really fun addition and could really lighten up a movie or show. However, now, I want to know, who do you want to see in the Justice Gang in the future? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.